now that the sort of bigger behemoth enemy has been defeated, which is sort of the left and the woke left and that whole narrative, now you're seeing the right of center thing, almost this immediate infighting taking place, where it's sort of like, I see certain players who are like, okay, we won. Now it's time to clean house on our side. You got to go. You got to go. You got to go. And I'll be specific, but it's more like the splitting between like those who are a little more principle based versus those who were more nativist and white identitarian that was in the party a little bit, that was on the ascent in the last years of Biden and post like October 7th. You're starting to see people drawing a little more distinctions. It came up in the conversation around the H1, what is it? The
Right.
H2,
H-1B visas.
yeah, the visas
About like highly skilled workers,
foreign
being able to
workers
come into America.
right. And I
Like
started seeing, I started seeing
tech
almost
companies,
immediately.
right?
Yeah. I started seeing almost immediately like Michaela Peterson talking about, like, she had this tweet like right off the bat that was we can put this up. Why the woke right pretend it was illegal immigration? Why did the woke right pretend it was illegal immigration they were concerned about when it turned out it was immigration in general? At least be honest about it. If there's assimilation into the culture and legal immigration, what's the problem other than skin color? In other words, guys, let's remember the whole time we've been saying we're against illegal immigration, but we're not against immigration. Like, it depends who's coming in and what skills are being brought. Like, who cares? What's your problem? And then all these other Trumpies who were like, no, who were like nativists, who want like sort of the white identitarian uglier parts of that Trump support base are like yelling and screaming about immigration. But then I saw like Tim Pool responded to her saying maybe we need to invest in American workers and not mass import visa non-U.S. workers, as it will dilute and damage our culture. Immigration is fine, but not at the expense of those who already live here if we do not invest in our citizens. So that's like a fair, he goes, this is not woke right. Woke right is a cringe nonsense term.
Which side is Tim Pool on? Where does he land? Is he anywhere near Nick Fuentes?
No. Then he goes, the Jews run the world people are so cringe. Holy shit. Calling out Jake Shields.
That's nice.
He says the guy who just sold his entire media company to Jews. That's what Jake Shields responds to. Tim is sort of like sympathetic to the grievances of people we may find distasteful, but he's not about their bad views. You know what I mean? He kind of understands maybe the disenfranchised feeling of some of those people who blame Jews. He said, guys, it's not Jews. Like, so he's more of that, like, kind of plays adjacent to it, but he doesn't subscribe to those views, but he tries to like speak with a little bit of sympathy. So he's like challenging Michaela Peterson on that. And then I just start seeing like the woke right term coming up where it's like, okay, we thought the left wingers were just these tribal DEI, want special privileges for affirmative action, minorities, and we're anti-white. And now we're seeing, okay, it's you guys who are like pro-white over everything else, or pro like a certain tribe that's being deemed sort of this, that's an identity politics of its own called woke rightness. Woke right.
Wait, so what woke right are the nativists? I would have thought woke right is like, they would call Michaela like, don't tell us how to speak, don't police our speech, but that's not what it is.
It's hard to define what woke right means because by definition, almost it's a contradiction in terms. Woke means left, right? When you think of that. And it's being debated as we speak about people throwing that term around. Like Tim Pool says, that's a nonsense term. What are you talking about? But a lot of people are accusing like Dave Smith of being, and these other people in that space who are like anti-Israel and criticizing like the American government, foreign policy, isolationists who are like, America's terrorists too. But they're not left wingers. They're like libertarians, but there's a wokeness there about like the marginalized group is sort of the American. This isn't necessarily what Dave Smith says because he rejects the term entirely, but it's being thrown at him, and he's throwing it at Zionists who are woke right because Zionists are tribal on Israel. And
they need a different term.
It isn't really working, but they're trying to. It's really a provocative term more than anything else because it's trying to call those who hate the left a form of leftism. You know. in the sense that no one's thinking on principle here. They're thinking on tribal, like people on the right are.
Oh, I like that. I like that. The discrepancy,
distinction,
not the distinction.
Distinction. Where it stems from is the fact that there are people on the right who are so afraid to sound left that when they see real racism, they won't call it out, or real anti-Semitism. Dave Smith will look at Jake Shields' Twitter feed, calling out, talking about disgusting Jews. Jews are the rot of the world. They're the reason behind all people's problems. And Dave will go, listen, so what? He's critical of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Or like just turning a blind eye to it. Like, look, I don't like that stuff, but like, all right. So he's just, he's got some issues with Israel. Or not, he doesn't defend the arguments, but he pretends they're just not being said, or just turns a deaf ear and a blind eye to them. And I'm like, are you afraid of sounding like the people who throw around the term racism too loosely? I agree. We shouldn't do that. But that doesn't mean when you do see it, you don't just it's easy enough to say, well, that is, because then you lose a little credibility if you can't. But I think there's people on the right who don't want to sound anything like the ADL or the BLM folks who threw around racism or anti-Semitism where it didn't exist. And that's what woke right seems to be to me, where you're like, I need to stick to this tribe of being anti-left and free speech absolute. We're to the point where I make no judgment on speech. That's weird.
I'm still pretty confused about it.
About what the term means?
Yeah.
It's a provocative term.
I think you did a good job, but it's not a natural, it's not an organic understanding. I think they need a better nickname.
But you understand the profile of those it's being hurled against. In other words, I'm calling you something that you're so afraid of sounding like the left that you lose your sense of critical judgment and thinking. And that's a form of wokeness where you're not using critical ideas and free thinking to judge and principles to judge things. You're using a sense of, I don't want to sound like a leftist. I am not a leftist. I am for free speech. That's my tribal identity, and that's another piece of identity politics.
Principled people on the right who are calling out people in their own party for thinking not from principles but from
tribalism,
culture, something else. Yeah.
From their identity being, I'm against the left. And what does the left do? They cry racism and sexism and homophobia, transphobia. So when I see behavior that reeks of that, I'm not going to call it out because I don't want to sound like them. So it's a little reactionary. And ironically, that's what they call us Zionists, because we see critical of Israel stuff and we have a reaction to that. And I think there's good reason, because not all two things that seem the same are the same. In some cases, I think it is really anti-Semitic. In other cases, it may not be. But I think, the funny thing is when the two sides hurl it at each other, they're both calling each other the same thing. And it's meant as an insult more than a refined label.
But bigger picture, the right is cannibalizing itself a bit. You could say election win.
Cleansing itself, cannibalizing itself, or like saying, okay, now we all kind of banded together in a sense for a common cause. And now we're going to Alex Jones went on a rant on his show saying, I just don't understand these people who are just they're just obsessed with Jews. Look, guys, I've spoken about some Jews. I've spoken about some people. There's good Jews. There's bad Jews. There's a lot of different kinds of Jews. I want to talk about other things. I want to talk about immigration. I want to talk about this. There are no Jews trying to shut me down. There's no Jewish conspiracy trying to censor my voice. It's never been the case. But you're obsessed with Jews. You have one answer for everything. Jews, 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 Jews. Talking about Jake Shields and Jackson Hinkle. All there's some serious anti-Semites on Twitter building followings.
Yeah.
And Dave Smith is tweeting about hey, I'll talk to all those people. I'll be a cool Jew, and then I won't be the Jew they're talking about.
Right.
It's a weird strategy, and part of me understands it. It's like that guy who will, Daryl Davis, move white supremacists by becoming friends with them and then realizing, but it's almost like this admission. You're giving them too much credibility to say you have a point about Jews. I'm one of the good ones. It's it's weird.
I mean, we have a long history of Jews who do that throughout our history. I don't think it's anything new.
But anyway.